Well, aloha and welcome to this week's module on variables and data types. This is module 5 in our series of applications programming concepts. So today we're going to look at how data is stored and manipulated as part of JavaScript and PHP, and it's basically the same as any programming language. So you're going to want to get the presentation slides here, and so we can bring those up like so. You're going to want to have NetBeans running and MAMP. So to get started with this, I would suggest that you have your screen, the presentation slides open, but not in presentation mode. You should have it in just viewing mode like this so that you can copy and paste things from here into NetBeans to try out. Okay, so again, you should have at this point Apache and NetBeans installed and working on your laptop. Apache comes along with MAMP, and of course NetBeans, you already know about that. So, this should not be Lab 4. This should be Lab 1. Let's go change that to Lab 1 like that. And let's open up MAMP. So let's make sure MAMP is running. So I have MAMP here, and I see the Apache server has a little dot. You don't need the SQL server, but it's not going to hurt anything to have it. So just hide that. Don't stop it. And then, of course, you could go to NetBeans, make sure NetBeans is running. And I like to organize my screen so that my web browser is off to the right here, and NetBeans is off to the left. You can tile it differently. You can have it vertically instead of horizontally, whichever you prefer. Let's make sure that the local server is running. Okay, so I see that it's running I just do localhost like that, and I can see I've got my stuff in htdocs directory running locally. So that's good. Remember, when you look at localhost like this, and MAMP is running, it's going to the htdocs folder inside the MAMP folder. That's what this means. And so you want to store your projects in there. So to get started, let's open up a new project. So I'm going to go right over here. You can do File, New Project like this, or you can actually just click on this part right here. And for this one, let's make a PHP project, PHP application. Hit Next, and let's call this Lab 1. And it says source folders. Now this source folder is defaulting to XAMPP htdocs. That's not the correct place. This is from my previous configuration. I should always have this defaulting to actually MAMP. So you want MAMP. If I'm on a PC here, so it's c:/htdocs/lab1. That's going to be where my sources are. If you're on the Mac, it's going to be under Applications, MAMP, htdocs, lab1. Make sure that you get the whole thing here, the whole path. PHP 5.4 is okay. UTF-8 is okay. You don't want to put NetBeans metadata in a separate folder. We'll talk about that later. It says run as. I'm hitting next. It says run as local website, or we could do remote website, run the script in the command line, or PHP built-in web server. You'll see what the differences are, but right now we're going to leave it at local website. That's because we're running MAMP with Apache, and that has everything we need to run that. But there are other options that might be useful in other times. It says the project URL is http://localhost/lab1. It's very important that this is the web address locally that will be used to execute your files. And remember, if you have this is the project URL, if you don't give it an actual file name here, it's going to look for the index.html or index.php file. This is PHP frameworks. Hopefully by the end of the semester we'll talk a little bit about these if we have time, but we don't need it. You can just go hit finish. Okay, and it brings up, you'll see here it says lab 1. We have the sources folder. It created an index.php file, and it populated that index.php file with some basic HTML and a little place to put your PHP code. So when you write PHP code, you always put it between the PHP open and the PHP close tags. If you're not writing PHP code, you do it outside of those. Okay, next lecture. But at this point, the previous lecture on locally and globally global web servers show you a little bit about what this is all about. There was an introduction previously on this. Down here you see it has output browser log, so this is going to be the console, and this is notifications of things about NetBeans. But this is useful because anything that comes out in the console will actually display here. And then we have our file browser. Okay, so what we want to do is we want to see if this is working. We're going to test this all. We're just going to put here in the body, we'll just put hello. So this little hello is just plain old HTML text, and if I execute this web page, it should just say hello. And I'm going to go over here. So it has a little Chrome thing, and I notice that it defaults to IDE's default browser. I actually want to use the NetBeans connector so I can do things in real time. Click run like that. There is my hello. It seems to work. And I could say hello and goodbye here like this. And if I save it, the NetBeans connector automatically updates it. Okay, so that seems to be working okay. And you can wipe this out now and then save that, and it's blank. Great, so let's get started. We're ready to go. Open up our PowerPoint here and moving on. So today we're going to talk about how to output to the screen and to the console. And we're going to talk about data types, basic data types, foundation of programming, and variables, another foundational element of programming. First thing we want to look at is how do you use JavaScript or PHP to output things. So we already know how to output things in HTML. We just type the HTML commands or text that we want, and it gets displayed by the browser. But there are programmatic ways to do this in JavaScript and in PHP. So one of the basic ways to get output using JavaScript is to use the document write command. So document would be the object. So if in the DOM, that represents the entire document page. Okay, and in that there's a method or a function called write, and in here the parentheses you'll put what it is you want to write to the document. So let's try that. Here's an example. It says document write quote hello, and when I want to put hello in there, notice that I have to designate it with these quotations, these single quotations. Those are delimiters, they're called. This is the begin delimiter and the end delimiter. It says that I'm interested in writing out the characters H-E-L-L-O. If I didn't put the delimiters in there, JavaScript doesn't know that this is a bunch of characters that I want to use. It might think it's a command or looking for a variable or something like that. And in JavaScript, once again, you don't need to, but it's useful to end everything in a semicolon. In PHP, you always have to end things in a semicolon. This is just a comment, and it gets ignored. Everything about here gets ignored, and it says could use double quote hello. So in JavaScript, the single quotations as delimiters and the double quotations as delimiters are perfectly equivalent. There's no difference. You can use whichever one you want. Sometimes it's convenient to use one versus the other. So I'm going to copy this, select that and copy it, and I'm going to go to my file here, index.php, and now I'm not going to put it inside the PHP tags because this is going to be JavaScript. So to designate JavaScript, I need to open up the script tag, right? And what gets opened must get closed, and you notice that when I hit enter, NetBeans conveniently put the close tag for me, and I'm just going to make a little space there, and I'm going to open up here, and I'm going to hit paste and move that over to the right. So within the script tags, JavaScript, document write quote hello. Now let's just try that out. by bringing up my browser over here, and if I hit save, and notice that the word hello appears. So document write says that wherever the end of the document is, add the text HELLO to it. Okay, so that's output from that. That's quite easy. That might not be the most convenient place for you to output your stuff, because we'll show you in a minute that, well, let's just take a look at that right now, actually. If I look at that, if I make another document here, I'll just copy and paste this, and I'll say goodbye. You see that it just smashes these together on a single line. They just keep at the end of the document. If I put something here, let's say I put this is a test, you'll see it puts that first, then hello, goodbye, and then afterwards here, where is this? You see, it puts it over there. So it's just wherever you put this, it just prints it out at the location that it occurs. Not necessarily the thing that you want to do. If you want to put things in a particular location, you can set any element that has an ID that will accept HTML. You can write to it directly as an object. So let's do that. So instead of let's create something here. So this is a test. Why don't we make this, why don't we put this in a div? So I'm going to say here div. Well, actually here, we'll leave this as a test. I'll say, I'll put here div, and then I'll close my div like that. So I'm making a division, and I'm just going to give this an ID. I'll call it place. Okay, you can call it whatever you want, and I'm leaving it empty. So remember, this is an open div tag with an ID place, and then a closed div tag with nothing in there. So the content of this object div, this division object, whose ID is place, is empty. The content is empty, but what's inside the content of this element, of this div tag, would be called the inner HTML, because it's inside. It's the HTML that's inside the nested tag versus outer HTML, which would be outside the tag. So this is the inner HTML of the div called place. And the way that you get access to that, there's a couple of ways to do this. The fully proper way to do that is ask the document for, then you can say, let's see, do dot, and then do get element by ID. So get element ID is a command that says get the reference to that object in the DOM by the ID. Which ID? Well, we want place here. Okay, and now once I have an access to that element, I can set its inner HTML. See, it says inner HTML string here. I can say that's its property, a property called inner HTML. I can set that equal to, let's say this is not. Okay, like that. And now if I save it, you see it says this is not a test. See how it printed it right there? And so it filled this inner HTML for this div tag with the text that I put here. And again, JavaScript doesn't really care about single or double quotes. You see, it could change double quotes here. I could change double quotes here. As long as you use the same one to open it and close it, it doesn't really matter. Sometimes by abuse, you can just do this. If you just type place like that. So since I gave this an ID, this is kind of already known to be the reference to the element whose ID is place. So let's just change that to fun. there, and you see it says this is fun a test. So you can, by abuse of shorthand, you can just use the ID directly. Now that's because I gave it an ID. If I gave it a name, it would not be the same thing. I could have to go get the element for the name. But if it's just an ID, it automatically sets that. So that's just a shortcut that's sometimes nice to know about. Now that's two ways. That's so how you can write to the HTML part of an element of a DOM object, or you can use the document write to output things. The other thing you might want to do to output is use the console log. So let's see what that does. Now the console log is a bit different. It doesn't actually output to the screen. It outputs to the console, and I'll show you the JavaScript console, but let's just put that over here. And so let's just put this in our screen here. I'll just do this like that. Console log hello. And now if I save that, you'll notice that it says this is fun a test. There is no hello. Where is my hello? Well, if you look down here at the output browser log, see there it is. It says hello because that was what NetBeans is monitoring the console output from JavaScript. That's exactly the same as if you go to your tools here in your browser. So I'm in Chrome here and I go to, where's my more tools here, and see it says JavaScript console. I could go to developer tools too, but go to JavaScript console, you'll see there is hello. So this console is the same as monitored by the NetBeans over here. So they're one and the same. So this is very useful when you need to output little messages. That's for development purposes, to see where things are at, get values of things, whatever, but you don't want it to appear on the screen. Okay. So that's JavaScript, right? What about PHP? Well, output in PHP is usually handled by the echo or print commands, and there are a variety of different ways to output things in PHP using both print and echo. And there are other functions like that are variants on echo and print. The only difference between echo and print in PHP is that print is a function that returns a value, which you'll talk about later, and echo is a built-in command which doesn't return a value. Why would you want to use one versus the other? Well, it depends on when you redirect the output to something other than the console or the screen. Then you might want to make sure that that successfully executed. So print will let you know that it's successfully output versus echo, which doesn't tell you anything. Okay, so let's try that over here. Let's go to here and we'll say, says now this time since it's PHP we need to put it in between our tags. So I'm going to put it right here. I'll just say echo quote hello, and looking at my thing here, I'll hit save, and there it is. See, this is a test hello. There it is. I guess maybe they say hello from PHP. How about that? That's a little more fun. There it says hello from PHP. And with the echo or print command, you can either use the parentheses. You should use the parentheses because it makes it easier to read, but it ignores those parentheses. It doesn't matter. And I can put the word print here, and you see it all still works. All the same. Okay? You'll notice that there is no new line. The reason why there's no new line here, see how it just says a test hello from PHP. It's not starting a new line. It doesn't actually give me a new line at the end too. So I'm going to put goodbye here. You'll see, and it just smashes it right after that. How would I actually make it make a new line? Well, when I print or echo from PHP, the output after executing everything between the tags here is just text. So if I output proper HTML, it will display that HTML on the browser. Because remember, this gets processed on the server. This gets processed on the web browser or the client. This gets processed on the server itself. So in other words, this gets executed by the PHP interpreter and then replaced with the output from that PHP interpreter, which then gets sent to the browser. So the upshot of that is if I put out regular HTML, the browser doesn't know the difference between what it was doing in PHP versus just plain HTML. So let's just say I want to put a new line before and after. I'll just put a line break. So I'll put a tag BR here and a tag BR there, and I hit save. And there, see, now I have a new line before, new line before, and a new line after. So it splits it up. You can see that by doing a view page source, and you can see it says hello from PHP. See, here's my tags. That is what got executed. So this text is the same as this text because the print command from PHP, all it does is when it gets executed by the PHP interpreter on the server, it just spits out that text exactly as you give it. Okay. By the way, notice that inside the div, so it says place.innerHTML equals fun. Notice that inside this div, there's no fun. It's just showing me the JavaScript, which actually does it because this is being executed. This is the file that gets sent from the browser, from the server to the browser. So that includes sending the JavaScript. This JavaScript got sent. And then this JavaScript is executed locally. It's executed here on the client. So it's only when I'm viewing the page does this fun get put inside the inner HTML. The reason why you don't see any PHP code here, right, is because this code gets executed on the server before it gets sent to the browser to mark up. Well, I hope that makes sense. That probably was as clear as mud. All right, moving along here. I'm going to make this a little smaller so it's not always getting in my way. If I needed to make a new line in the console, which is not something I need to do, you need to use double quotes like this. Whoops. Double quotes like this, and then a \n. Later on when we talk about strings, you'll see why we need to do that. But the backslash is, since you hit the enter key, is not something that you can see. We need to have some special character way to display to say that we wanted a new line. In HTML, it'd be something else, but in JavaScript or in PHP, you use \n. Let me show you what I'm talking about here. So let's just say I put this in double quotes like that. Let's say double quotes. Whoops, double quotes. Well, let's start with this. Let's start with replacing this with \n. Okay, and now I save and run it. You'll see that I get a \n. So it just thought that it was actual characters. But if I put in double quotes here like this, double quotes like that, then you'll see that the backslash disappeared. And but I don't see a new line. Where's the new line? Well, let's take a look. If I do a view page source here, you'll see here's the new line. It says a test, and then there's my new line, hello. So you'll see that the source sent it out as a new line, but new lines are ignored by HTML. If you want a line break in HTML, you got to use the BR tag, not a new line. That does nothing. It's just the same thing as doing this. You know, you're putting in the body. It's the same thing as doing like that, which is, you know, if I hit run there, let's go back here. If I hit there, you see it doesn't change it at all. The only way that you can actually get spaces is by putting a line break or a new paragraph or something like that. So the upshot is if you want a new line, you need to put the \n. I think it even works for JavaScript. So I see console log, so that's going to be in the console. What happens if I do \n like that, and let's save it. Boom, like that. And you can see there it put a new line in. Okay, so that's all that we have to say about output for now. We'll get back to that later. So what's a variable? A variable literally is just a name for a location in memory. So we often need to save up some sort of value to use or reuse in multiple places within our programs. And so variables are extremely important because basically most of what programming is managing and manipulating data. So you have to have a way to store that data and to refer to that data. Now, the useful thing about variables is that it allows you to abstract away from the data itself and give it a name. And so it's very important that when you use a variable that you name it something meaningful, because that allows you to understand what that data is or what it's meant to do. And then a variable, as the name implies, can vary in data. So you can take the data for one thing and then change that data but use the same variable. So for example, if I have a program that's trying to print out the name, say somebody's name and then age, like this, Dan, and say 30.3, I can easily just replace this name with, say, Josh or Sally, and age with 22 or 44. And my program doesn't have to know exactly what that data is. It could just say print the name, print the age, and then it'll print Dan and 30.3, or if I change that value, it will print whatever is inside that location's name. Okay, so variables are a place in memory for a piece of data so that you can refer to it by its name rather than by always printing out the data itself or using the data itself. And it always can only hold one piece of data at a time. So a variable is like a little bag of thing, or a box or a slot that can hold only one piece of data at a time. It can only hold one type of data. There's different kinds of data. You see, like this is a bunch of characters, the letter D, A, and N. And age here is a floating point number or decimal, 30.3. They're different kinds of data. Nevertheless, scalar data is when you scalar data is when the data is just one value. It doesn't have multiple values. But a compound type can hold multiple data values. So even though a variable can only hold one type of data at a time, the type of data could be either a scalar or a compound. And you'll see that later. Right now we're only going to talk about scalar ones, but compound things group things together so into one thing. So the syntax for using a variable in PHP is using the $, and then these angle brackets identifier just means it's a note to you. It just says you replace the whole thing with just what we call an identifier. And the identifier is just the name of the variable. But if there's certain rules identifiers have to follow. So you might have something like $name, $age, like over here. And this should be JavaScript example. Sorry about the code. I'll make sure I upload these correct slides. JavaScript example, you would designate a variable by using the keyword var and then name. So in PHP, you use the $ in front of it to designate something's a variable. In JavaScript, you use var name, var age to declare. Now, PHP doesn't declare variables, you just use them, whereas in JavaScript you declare and then you use them. Once I set var name, then this becomes something you can use without the var in it later on. I'll show you what I'm talking about. Now, the assignment operator is the most fundamental thing for variables because it allows you to put a value in the box or in the variable. So the assignment operator is equals, the equals sign. Now the equals sign is not the same as in algebra where you're saying that one sign equals another, that means that they are equivalent in value. This literally says that take whatever's on the right hand side and put it into the variable on the left hand side. Okay, so for example, if I say $count equals 10, that says take the value 10 and assign it to the variable with the $sign here, who's identified by the word count. Okay, and interestingly enough, you can actually perform operations before you do the assignment. You'll see that this is very useful. Something like this, like $count minus 1, that says, okay, whatever is in the variable $count, whatever value's in there, subtract 1 from it, and then assign it to the variable count, assign it back to itself. So it's replacing it. So it takes whatever was in there before, subtracts 1 from it, and then it replaces itself. So you see that this equal sign is not the same thing as in algebra, as that this side equals that side in value, because this possibly cannot be the same value, because I'm taking 1 off from here, so they can't be the same. Similarly, in JavaScript, you can do the same sort of thing. This is how you would assign 10 in JavaScript. Let's try it out. Let's try these out. Let's go to NetBeans here, and let's just use the, let's start with, actually I'll go back to this. Let's leave that alone. And let's leave that alone for now. And I'm going to say print. Let's start with this. We'll say $count equals 10 in PHP. And then if I say print $count, okay, what that does is it says whatever value is in here, print it out. So let's take a look at that. If I save and run it, it says this is a test, 10, goodbye. Actually, let me just get rid of some of these things. There's too much junk here. There. 10, goodbye, good. So notice that that's what that is. And if I say $count equals $count minus 1, now right now I've initialized the variable count by assigning it the value 10. So now I can say, well, whatever's in there, subtract 1 from it, then that whole thing now gets assigned back to count. So when I print count, you'll see that now I have the value 9 instead of the value 10. So I successfully decremented it. Now let's try the same thing. Let's type var count here equals 10. And if I say equals count like this, now notice that you don't use the, I'm not going to use the quotes here, because this is a variable. I don't want to assign to inner HTML. I don't want to put that the word count. I want it to be what's ever inside the variable count. So I don't use quotes. See, if I use quotes like this, right, notice it just prints out count. But if I take the quotes out, it prints 10. See the difference? So one says use what's ever in here. The other one means literally the characters C-O-U-N-T. And once again, I can say, I can do this. Once I've defined count, I can just say count equals count, oops, minus 1 like that. And if I save it, notice that it has a 9 there too. So now we know how to assign values to variables and use variables in both PHP and in JavaScript. Okay, moving on. So when you create a variable, it's declared the first time that you set a value for it in PHP. In JavaScript, it's a little bit different. So when you declare a variable in PHP, it associates that with a place in memory. It has like a little address that it puts the value, and it sets the data type for it. So if I say, so PHP is called a lazy typed language, meaning that you don't have to say what kind of data type it is. It will infer what it is by how you're using it. So if I say 1.1, assign that to $A, that says, oh, A is a variable that's storing a real number, or in programming terms, it's called a float, or a floating point number. I could also say something like $A equals true. True is, notice there's no quotes around this. True is actually a Boolean type value, and there's two kinds of Boolean values, a true and a false, meaning, true or false. They're logical things. Okay, so Boolean value has exactly either, it can be exactly either true or false. That's the only two things it can be. And if I say $A equals quote zip zap, or double quote zip zap, it's assigning the variable a string whose characters are capital Z IP space capital Z AP. Similarly, in JavaScript, you declare a variable by saying var, and then it will type it by the way that you use it. In both PHP and JavaScript, you can actually set the type of data by explicitly saying it's a float, it's a boolean, it's a string, but you could also make it lazy and just not let it infer what it is. So when you make a name for a variable, you're giving it an identifier, what is identified by, and identifiers have to follow certain rules. So an identifier can't start with a digit, so there's a particularly curious reason why that's so. For an extra credit problem, I always find out why they made the rule that you don't start variable names with a digit. You can contain only numbers, letters, the underscore, and some other special characters, but you can't contain, say, something like the space, because the space character is designated as a separator. So the separator splits things apart, so it wouldn't know whether you mean this to be the variable name or something else if you use a space. So typically, if you need to use something that has a space in it, you would use the underscore instead. The names are case sensitive, so that the identifier this name and that with capital T and N is different than the lowercase t. So they are absolutely two different variables. Hey, just for fun, let's try that out. So let's say I do var count equals capital count like that, and let's see what happens when I run it. Notice that I get nothing. It actually gave me an error. It says uncaught reference error, count is not defined, because I tried to declare this and I've tried to use it. I tried to use something here called lowercase count that's never been used, so I get an error. PHP is a little more forgiving and a little less careful about this. So if I say $count equals 10, watch what happens now. I get -1. So what's happening is that this variable is 10, but then it says $count equals $count -1. Well, you didn't declare count as anything, so it just assumed that it was 0, subtracted 1 from that, so it's -1, and assigned it to count. So when I print it out, I get -1. Notice the difference between JavaScript. JavaScript gives an error and doesn't run. PHP runs, but just assumes something. Okay, so but the point is that case matters. Okay, now even though these are things you must obey, good programming practice says that you should follow these rules. Like, you should give meaningful names to your variables. They should reflect what the variables are, or what kind of data it is. Usually you start variable names with lowercase unless you have some reason not to, and you can capitalize the interior words or put an underscore in for spaces. So if you were going to say eggs per basket, see how you can easily read that. If you, instead of eggs per basket, that's hard to read, although both of them are perfectly acceptable identifiers, but one is by convention better. If you need to do that, you could also say eggs per basket like that. That also would be easy to read and also conventional. You capitalize constants, things that you don't expect to change, and things that you might declare as things you don't change. There's a few other good programming practice we'll talk about later. Default values are what we just saw PHP doing. Default values means that if you don't assign a value when you declare the variable, it will assume a value. So if I say $A equals $A plus 1, what happens is I'm trying to use A over here, but I haven't used it before. So I'm going to try to add 1 to something that I haven't used before. So it's going to assume that, oh, it's going to be A must be 0. And the reason why it thinks A must be 0 is because you're adding a number 1 to it, and figures that a simple default value, if you don't know what the value is, that adding 0 to anything doesn't hurt it. So it sets it equal to 0. Okay, so right now after running this command, $A will be equal 1. It'll also give you a little warning that says, hey, you're trying to use a variable that hasn't been defined, but it'll still run. $S equals $S dot Fred. The dot is the concatenation operator. It just takes characters and smashes them together. So if I'm trying to use $S and I've never defined what it is and I'm trying to smash it together with a bunch of other characters, it's going to assume that there's the empty string or the empty character here. That should be like that. There, we'll leave it like that. Okay, what else we have? Similarly, for JavaScript, var a equals $A plus, oops, that's not a dollar, $A like that. And those things assume the default values. It's always best not to rely on the default values that you use in PHP or JavaScript. So let's just say I said var count. So I'm going to say var count. So that's going to define it like that, and I run it. You see, I get var count, that defines it, but then I say count equals count minus 1. You'll see that what JavaScript did is it tried to subtract 1 from something that wasn't defined, which gave you an NaN, which is not a number. Now if I did that for PHP, I'm going to just put a comment here like that. You'll see that it gave me minus 1 because it assumed that it was 0 because I tried to subtract something from it. So things may not behave the way you want them to, so you should always initialize and declare your variables when you use them. Don't rely on the programming language to give you the right thing. So there's two main types of data types in PHP. Actually, this is PHP. and JavaScript. There's the scalar and the compound. Scalar are called primitive things. You don't break them down into anything simpler. Things like integers, floating points, which are real numbers, strings, booleans, those are all scalars. And then there are more complex data types, which we'll talk about later, such as arrays and objects, which are mixtures of these things. To ones you need to know for now, you need to know integers, booleans, floating points, and the null. You can see some examples of what these things are and how they work. You can read this for yourself. Like the Boolean has only two values, true or false. Floating point numbers are a little strange, but there are a certain number of decimal points of a real number. Integers can also be strange. Sometimes integers look weird, like this 07755 actually is an integer in octal, or a different base. And it starts with a 0, so that's how it knows. But if you did a print 0577, let's just try it out. Let's see what happens if I do that. Let's just say count equals 0777, and now I run it. You'll see it gave me the number 511. So 0777 in octal is the same as 511 in base 10. Okay, so sometimes it's convenient to use different base number systems, but generally you're not going to have to see that or worry about that. The null, by the way, means the null value. It means nothing. It's no value at all. It's a way that you empty something out. The other more important data type you need to know is a string. A string is just a sequence of characters. We always designate a string with a quote or double quote and ending the characters with a quote or double quote. So it groups them all together. So something like Mr. Smith or quote all these. And notice if I say quote 21.7 here, I'm actually meaning the character 2, the character 1, the character period, and the character 7. I don't mean the number 21.7. So it's a difference when you put quotes around things. It just means a string of characters or a sequence of characters. So the null is the no value type. It's used for unsetting things. If you say $A equals null, that wipes it out. You could also use the command unset. That also wipes it out. Similarly in JavaScript, you say var equals null. It sets it to nothing. Let's try that out. So if I said count equals null, like that, you'll see when I run it that I get nothing. See, when I print it out, it's gone. I only get 9 and goodbye. I only get 9 and goodbye because of the JavaScript. And if I say var count equals null, I'm probably going to get an error when I do this. Yeah, I get -1. Right, so it said count equals null, which is nothing. It assumed it was 0. I subtract 1 from that. Okay, if I comment this out, you'll see that I get a blank. So null just means nothing. But again, it will default to different things depending on how you're using it. Okay, we'll talk more about that later. Now when we get to class, we'll do exercise 1 in the lab. The last thing we want to talk about is just simple expressions. We've already started using an expression. Actually, when you assign a value to a variable, that is an expression. An expression is just anything that returns a value. Anything that returns a value is an expression in programming. And the way that you return an expression is you have things that operate on data, or operators. So for example, if I say 1 plus 2 here, the plus is an operator that operates on the data, which is an integer here called 1 and an integer 2. It just says basically take this guy and add it to that guy and return what that sum is. In this case, it's going to return 3. Same for 3 star 2, that means multiply. And if I use the dot, that means take characters and smash them together. This is another kind of command called printf. It's a different way of printing things in PHP. You could say 5 divided by 3 is about this. We'll learn more about this command later. But you can see, right, what's important here is that I'm using 5/3 here to divide 3 by 5 and see what happens. Let's try some of these things out. Okay, so let's try, see, count equals 1 plus 2. You see, and I get 3. And I could say 2 times 3, and I get 6. Right? And I could say 2 divided by 3, and I get this big decimal here, etc., etc. Similarly, we can do 1 plus 2 in JavaScript and get 3. I could look at 2 times 3, I get 6. And I could look 2 divided by 3, and I get all that stuff. Okay, so JavaScript and PHP both use expressions. There are a variety of different expressions. Some of the basic ones are plus, minus, string concatenation. It just means put things together. Multiply, divide, and this is the remainder after dividing. Let's take a look at this particular one here, this echo big dude. I'm going to copy that just so you get a feel for what that's all about. Let's just say like that. If I say echo, I'm going to put a line break in there too, like that. If I say echo big dude, notice I say big dude goodbye. So it's saying echo, I got a string here, right? All these characters, and then concatenate with a blank space, and then concatenate with those characters. The upshot is I get the characters big space dude. So variables can be operated on, and meaning that I perform the operations on one side and then I can assign it to a variable. So I can say, look, before I was just looking at data and operating on data, but what happens here is that whatever is inside A, add 1 to it. Whatever is inside A, multiply it by 2. Whatever is inside S, smash that together with space FRED. Okay, so we're just operating on the data. So I might say, let's do this. Big, right? And then I'm not going to print that anymore. I'm going to say print new line, like this. And then I'm going to concatenate that with $count. Now that's not a good name, but because count isn't big. But what I'm going to do is it's going to smash this character together, right? That's what concatenate does with whatever's in count. And count has big in it with a space and then dude. So let's save it there, and it says, look, see, big dude. Or maybe I should make that a capital B. There we go. Big dude. All right. Lastly, printf means printed format. JavaScript actually does have a similar command, but printf is a very useful but very powerful command. It takes a little studying, so you're going to need to look up in the manual about this. But for right now, printf means print formatted, and what it does is you give it first the format, the string format that you want. Notice it's in a quote and a quote here. And then you can also give it modifiers. So if I say %.2f, the percent means print a value that is in the argument of printf. And the argument means after this comma, here's the argument, 3.141527. And it says modify it by only showing 2 decimal points as a floating point. So let's copy this. I don't know why it's not letting me copy that. There we go. Copy over here. And I'm going to comment that out. So if I say printf, this prints 2 decimal places of that. Boom, says this prints 2 decimal places of 3.14. Goodbye. If I want more, I can go print 4, like that. Some weird things happen. Notice how many, so it's taking this value here and printing out only 1, 2, 3, 4 decimal points because of that 0.4 there. Watch what happens if I go exceeding the number of decimals I have. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Let's make this print out 10. It just put zeros automatically after that. Can't print out more than you have. You can also change this. What if I said percent something like percent %d? That says treat this value, whatever this value is, treat it as an integer. And see, so it says, look, prints 2 decimal places of 3. You can even make it a string. If I say print it as a string like that, then it prints these as characters. That's actually all those characters. It's not the number. So the percent just means whatever comes after the comma substituted in here. This tells you what kind of, the S or the D or the I or whatever tells you what kind of thing it should be. And we'll look more about this in class. Okay, so I think that's it. And I will see you in class for the lab.